3 weeks had passed since Tony and Willa's wedding. They'd been joined in marriage along with Brad and Gloria. John and Jenny had given the two couples 2 days in Hawaii and then called up Harry Jones and for a gold coin extended the stay for 2 weeks for both couples. The kids came back very tan. They had lots of great things to share. It gave the parents time to gather the basics for 2 apartments. On the working front, there had been votes taken in those states that used to be the USA east of the Mississippi River. Johnny, Bill, and their wives and new friends had been busy along the eastern seaboard, and Leslie Madison, Treese, had pulled the states just west of the Mississippi River together. Louisiana was no longer a state as it was 100% submerged. Texas was the only state that had any negative votes on the subject. 6 out of 50 constituents voting no was expected of Texas. John also met with a group from Mexico. Mexico City was gone. Earthquakes and fires pretty much destroyed all of it. The Mexicans did not have anyone they trusted to lead their nation. People were starving to death. The good people involved with leadership were running up against the drug lords. General Williams suggested President John Taylor go meet with President Putin of Russia. They'd also been hit with many earthquakes, but Moscow was one of the few capitals of the world still intact. Brazil, India, China, South Africa were also in okay shape as far as landmass, but infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, rail, and airports, were a mess. It was about 6 p.m. in Moscow. John and Jenny were holding on to Willie and materialized in the president's office, along with Tony and Willa. President Putin was holding his head in both hands with his elbows on his desk. He looked up as he simultaneously pushed a button on his desk. A door opened and a man came in and immediately fired a gun at Tony. The bullet hit Tony's shield and returned to the center of the man's chest. Jenny and Willa got to the man seconds after he hit the floor and began healing him. "President Putin, is there any water available?" Tony asked. "In the small refrigerator over there." President Putin pointed to his right where a coffee machine was. Below the coffee machine, John picked up the gun. It looked like something James Bond would carry. He ejected the clip and then the round in the chamber. He put it back into the clip and clicked the safety on. "Willie, can you take this over to the nice man?" He pointed to President Putin. "Okay, Daddy," Willie said as he held the gun by its barrel in his right hand and the clip in his left hand. He ran over to President Putin and raised his hands when he came near. "Thank you," as President Putin took the gun and ammo clip. His eyes locked on John Taylor's. He thought, this man has brought his family. He is not afraid of harm. His actions speak louder than his words. He and his family can stop bullets. I have heard rumors and read stories from their newspapers that this president of the new U.S. can do some of this. "Welcome," Willie said and ran back to his dad to be picked up. John walked over to President Putin. "Sorry for the alarm, Mr. President." President Putin stood and the two men shook hands. "I'm President Taylor of the new United States." "How much have you put back together?" President Putin asked. "We have petitions from many of the remaining 49 states. Eastern Canada and Mexico have also petitioned to join us." John Taylor answered. President Putin then shook hands with Willie. "I'm President Putin. Who are you?" "Willie." "Taylor?" President Putin asked. Willie nodded his head. "You are quite the little man." President Putin tickled Willie. "Thanks." Willie giggled. With help from Tony and Jenny, the security guard got to his feet. He made his way over to the desk of his president. He took a deep breath and stood at attention. "At ease." Putin handed the young man his pistol and clip. The young man put the clip in his pistol and placed the pistol in his shoulder holster. "Sorry, sir." "No, you did what I wanted you to do. It is I who saw danger where there is none." "President Taylor, do you have anything to say to this young man?" "Yes, he needs to rest and drink plenty of water for the next day," John suggested. "Can he sit at his desk?" President Putin asked. "He may feel sleepy and even experience some dizziness," John advised. "If you need to, call Henst." President Putin directed, "Thank you, Dmitri. I'm glad you're okay." The young man bowed and left. "President Putin, I would like to introduce Jenny, my wife," John announced. "The new United States must be honored to have you as their First Lady." President Putin kissed Jenny's hand. Jenny was dressed simply in blue jeans and a plaid shirt. Thank you, Mr. President, for your kind words. Jenny bowed. I am truly honored to be here and to meet you. Willie Taylor? President Pusin asked. Pusin held his hand up flat to Willie. Me. Thank. Goodman. Willie smacked Pusin's hand. This is also my son, Tony, and his wife. We are most proud of their achievements and have given them their rights as adults. John was smiling. You can stop a bullet? Pusin asked Tony. He looked to Willa and they both nodded. Yes, sir, we all can. Well, maybe not squirt, Tony replied, looking at Willie. Willie looked challenged. Me, he said while nodding. President Pusin turned to John Taylor. Why are you here? We are servants of God and we are responding to your request for help. John shared. My country is bankrupt. How can you possibly help? President Pusin shook his head. I expect to be killed in the panic about to erupt. We have an abundance of food this year and yet all my highways and railroads and even my airports are disabled. I can't get the food to most of the people. We would like to take you to see God, John shared. I don't believe in God, President Pusin stated. Then why were you praying? John asked. Many of my people do. I felt if he was out there, he might be willing to save those who believe. President Putin shared in defeat. If we prove to you there is a God and he has sent us, will you let us help you in your great nation? John asked. You want me to believe in a religion? President Putin asked. No, all religions have been based on wise men who might not have had all the facts. John smiled. This will be your understanding with God. President Putin walked about his office. He saw Dmitri's blood on the floor. Bending down, he soaked up some of it with a napkin. He stood, went to the door, and called Dmitri in from his post at the desk just outside. As Dmitri came through the door, President Putin closed it. Come. President Putin directed the young man so that both were standing in front of the Taylors. We would like to meet God. Please come with us. In a flash, they were there. The 6 adults went over to the Christports, and today there were 6 seats. Gaia worked with President Putin and Matt worked with Dmitri. Bert and Willie sat on the floor and leaned against God. After an hour, everyone was back in President Putin's office. The first thing President Putin's mind did was to deny what he had just experienced. He looked at Dmitri and saw a little kiss on his left cheek. Willa was holding up a little mirror for the president to look at his face. How did that get there? President Putin asked, as he looked in the mirror at the little bitty kiss on his cheek. My future daughter, Gaia kissed you. Remember, sir? Jenny asked. That couldn't have been real, President Putin stated. He was struggling within his own mind. He looked at the smiling faces of the Taylor family. Okay, you are my guests. Please come with me to my home, President Putin offered. They traveled to President Putin's home by a van driven by one of the security personnel. On the way, President Putin made a call. The group was introduced to the president's lady friend. She had a name nobody seemed able to pronounce. She laughed and suggested everyone call her Maya, and she introduced her 2.5-year-old boy. These people are healers. I saw them bring a dead man back to life. I permit them to heal our son. Do you agree? President Putin asked his partner. Maya started crying. Our son was learning to walk, and he lost his balance and fell, hitting his head against the wall. Maya looked at Jenny and Willa. Okay, she whispered. Scott had a dazed look on his face. He did not change his expression for new things. He was alive, but he was not there in his body. Let's go and sit down, Jenny suggested. They moved into the apartment and had Maya sit in the center of the couch holding her son. Tears were still rolling down her cheeks. What is his name? Willa asked. We call him Scott, Maya shared. How long ago was he hurt? Jenny asked. 4 or 5 months, Maya shared. She was starting to settle down again. Doctors? John asked. Dozens of them, Maya shared. Jenny was sitting on Maya's right and Willa was on her left. John was in front of Maya on his knees on the floor. John led the Lord's Prayer. When he finished, see yourself in the Christ ports. Let God work through you. Willie had climbed up onto the couch and was leaning over Jenny as she worked near Scott's head. Tony was standing with President Putin. He looked around and saw a comfortable chair, picked it up, and moved it so President Putin could sit close and watch what was happening. He saw a mate to the chair and moved it, so he was sitting next to the Russian president. "Can they do anything for my son?" President Putin asked quietly. "Before my father and mother adopted me, the first time I saw them, they were healing a 9-year-old boy who'd been hit by a truck. He was broken in many places. There was no doubt he was dead. Dad laid the boy out and straightened his body and arms and legs. The boy is fine and a short time ago caught a salmon that weighed as much as he does." Tony shared, "He is the mayor's son of our town of Omak. He is the future chief of the native people." "I saw that article. There was another boy who caught a big fish. It weighed 50 kilograms. I've caught such fish on the east coast of my country." Putin looked at Tony. "You are that boy?" "Yes," Tony smiled. "It took everything I had to bring that fish in." There was a pop and then the sound of several vertebrae snapping into position. Scott cried out, "Ah!" Scott started to make more noise and waved his arms and kicked his legs. Then he settled down and slowly opened his eyes. He looked up to his mother and said, "Mama," in Russian. "Could he talk before the accident?" Tony asked. Putin was still watching his son, but he shook his head no. "So his learning didn't stop," Tony observed as they watched. Scott sat up and looked at Willa. Willa nodded her head and smiled. "Hi." He stood in his mom's lap and gave her a big hug. His head was turned away from Jenny and Willie. He turned and looked at Jenny. Then he saw Willie and got excited and spoke in Russian. Willie responded, "Hi." Willie pointed to himself. "Me, Willie." Shut. Scott?" The little boy thought through the solution. "Me, Scott." With tears of joy on her face, Maya looked up and met the eyes of President Putin. He was happy. His hand was hiding his mouth, not wanting his son to see him laughing at him. Maya whispered in Scott's ear, "Daddy's here." Scott looked around, and when he saw his daddy, he climbed down and tried to stand on his feet. Willie held out his hand, and with Willie's help, ran to his dad in excitement. President Putin caught his son up in a hug. "He becomes president of Russia when he grows up," Tony shared. John moved over to sit in front of Jenny on the floor. President Putin jerked and looked at Tony, then looked to John. "You came here to heal my son." John laughed. "We have a list." John looked at Tony. Scott was still jumping in his dad's arms and laughing. He turned and sat down on his dad's lap to watch what was about to happen. "We understand your nation's gold has vanished," Tony confirmed. "Yes, the old United States was not alone in having evil within its leadership." President Putin shook his head, but smiled when Willie went and sat down in John's lap. Tony handed President Putin a map with a star on it. The longitude and latitude were visible with a line pointing to the star. The star was on the new land in the north of Russia. The new land popped up with the earth changes. "What will I find here?" President Putin asked. "Enough wealth, enough gold. We believe there are tens of thousands of metric tons at that location. Enough to get your country and all of Europe and many countries here in Asia moving again," Tony shared. "How do we learn what you know?" President Putin asked, "Will I see my son become president?" Putin looked at Scott. "You will see both of your sons become president." John shared, then turned to Tony. "My wife and I will stay here and train you and 400 of your men to become teachers if you would like," Tony offered. President Putin looked to John. "Why is such a task assigned to such young people?" "Because they can do it, where perhaps no one else can." John gave President Putin a big smile. He then looked to Scott. "We all have talents and gifts just a little bit different than anybody else's." President Putin thought on this for a minute or two. "What is the step after that?" President Putin asked. "Have the 400 train a division, then take on the cities." Tony smiled. "Make a list, take them to see God and offer classes to your citizens and train all of your militaries." John was watching his adopted son work with President Putin. Tony and Willa had taken the GED testing, and they both passed with flying colors. They were now working on a 2-year degree in the Omak Junior College, towards what they wanted to do when they finished growing up. Tony's was to work with the leaders of the world to get their people back to work and keep them working. John had been assigned as one of his coaches. If the universities in British Columbia and Washington State University could be saved, they would provide options for the many students in the area for higher-level degrees. An older woman came out of the kitchen and whispered to President Putin, "I have been informed that our wonderful cook, Mia, has dinner ready for us," President Putin announced. Maya whispered to Mia. She looked at Scott and shouted for joy. She touched the boy on the cheek. Mia, Scott said. "Yes, Scott. Me is Mia," the cook said, crying happy tears. "President Taylor, would it be okay to include our cook Mia with the meal? She has become a part of our family," President Putin asked. "Certainly. Something smells very good." John smiled. So they were seated. John Taylor was seated on the west end and Vid Putin on the east end. Jenny and Maya were next to their mates with the two boys in high chairs between them. Tony and Willa were across from the boys. Mia sat between Willa and Vid. Dinner was salmon, rice, and vegetables. Mia explained that in the center of the table was a covered heated tray with additional servings of everything. She also explained that she had prepared an apple pie for dessert. The meal was fun. The two boys loved the sweet sauce and dipped their steamed vegetables into it. They got comfortable with each other. They did not clean their plates, but had seconds of the fish and veggies, and all were pleased with their efforts. The adults were more than satisfied and shared their feelings with Mia. Mia jumped up and went to the kitchen to serve the pie. When Maya also went into the kitchen, Jenny and Willa followed her. "We have gifts for you." John stood and went to Vid's end of the table. He handed Vid a key, and next to him, 12 boxes materialized. Vid handed the key back to John, and he opened the two top boxes. He handed the key back to Vid, then he handed him a tray of 41-ounce gold coins and a tray of 41-ounce silver coins. John then returned to his seat to wait for pie and ice cream. Vid looked at the two trays with the coins. He picked up two, one each of the gold and silver coins. The engravings were identical. A little girl standing between the two boys who were kneeling was pictured on one side of the coin. The date 2018 was across the bottom. Vid turned the coins over. There, again, the engravings were identical. "In God we serve for a better world" was across the top. The symbol of Aquarius was centered on each coin. Because gold weighed more than silver, the former coin was slightly smaller than the latter. Vid looked to John, trying to figure him out. John smiled. "President Putin, we intend to become a good neighbor to you in the world. My family wants to become friends with your family." Willie shouted, "Yes!" as he raised his hands in the air. "We start by performing actions we hope will be considered friendly." John smiled as he looked to Willie. "Our gift to you is 10,000 one-ounce silver coins and 2,000 one-ounce gold coins. We also offer a willingness to loan your government enough gold for it to function until you feel independent again. We also offer to assist you in getting the gold back that was stolen before the earth changes. God is telling us that your gold is under a city called Denver in the state of Colorado. That's what my next project is. Much of the gold in the world has been hidden there, including that of the old United States. So my country will be all right again. Are you going to disband your military?" President Putin asked. "No, but their role will be different in the future. We will teach them what we know, and when they've taught the people of the countries they're stationed in, they will either be reassigned or discharged." John responded, "For a time, we're requiring all young people to take military training. We will evolve into a civilian defensive force only. This might take 10 or 20 years." The apple pie and ice cream were being served. "No more war?" President Putin asked this as he was looking at his mate. "The means for war has diminished with the loss of the old U.S. Capitol. Now we must work on the reasons and the attitude for war." John gave Jenny a big smile as he was served. "I understand London's sunk below the water and the Vatican has burned. God bless this world. I'm not sorry to see the 3 city-states of the world gone. The library at the Vatican was untouched. Isn't that something?" Maya shared. "When I was a small boy, my father and uncles wanted to grow apples. They put together everything they had and bought some land in southern Russia, near the Black Sea. They bought little apple trees from all over the world. They planted the trees together in a nursery. Every day, my cousins and I watered those trees with a measuring cup. Growing up, I picked thousands of tons of apples. These apples came from my family's apple farm." President Putin shared, "This pie tastes really good today." Vid looked to his mate and then to his cook. Do you think a farmer, a fisherman, and a carpenter can get this world running again? John asked. Along with a lot of help from our family and friends, of course. John looked around the table. As John looked around the table, an affirmative response resounded. Yes! Monday morning, Tony and the Russian president decided a small group of English-speaking soldiers should start the training with Tony and Willa. The first day, Tony and Willa demonstrated to the men the ability to block tennis balls. Dmitri was there to assist and to fire the gun to show the men Tony's abilities. After a half hour, Tony went over to Dmitri. Dmitri, something is wrong. These men cannot speak English. No, that can't be. Maybe they do not understand your accent, Dmitri suggested. Ask them questions in English, Tony suggested. He watched Dmitri talk with each man. When he had made the rounds, Dmitri asked the last man, Speak English? The man shook his head and said, No, cannot. He spoke in Russian. Dmitri, do we dare take them to God? Tony asked. No, I have relief coming out. Teach me how to stop a bullet. Dmitri pleaded, Can you give me 10 more minutes? Where is the president? Willa asked. We will go there in 10 minutes when my relief is here. Dmitri shared. Dmitri had them line up on both sides like they did when we fired the gun. Tony suggested, Willa, you throw the tennis balls, please. The first 2 balls hit Dmitri. The soldiers laughed, and Tony and Willa joined in and made a game of it. The third ball bounced away. Tony was continuing to guide Dmitri. The 4th ball hit him, but the next 4 did not. The soldiers all started speaking in Russian, and there seemed to be a consensus for one man who stepped forward to talk. Another man was coming from the president's office. He had an AK-47, he aimed, and the first round went at Dmitri. The second and third rounds were aimed at Tony. He sent them back and watched the man die on his feet. The 4th round would have hit the soldier standing closest to Tony, but Tony reached out with his left hand and reflected it to the shooter. Tony looked to his right at the smiling face of Dmitri. Where is the president? In his chambers, Dmitri shared. Let me have your pistol. You and Willa bring the machine gun. Tony directed. Give me a 5-second head start. Tony kissed Willa and was gone. The first thing Tony saw was a man in uniform standing 5 feet from the president with his pistol pointed at him. Tony pointed Dmitri's pistol at the man. When the uniformed man saw Tony, he turned and fired. Tony reflected the bullet to the general. The look on the general's face was of surprise. His eyes rolled up in his head, then he hit the floor hard. Are you okay, Mr. President? How did you realize there was a problem? Vid asked. None of the men that we were given to train could speak English, Tony answered. When Dmitri and Willa materialized, Tony handed Dmitri his gun. Dmitri looked at his pistol. The safety is on? Didn't want to take a chance on shooting myself. Tony smiled. Thank you for my life. Dmitri shared. What happened? Vid asked. I called for a replacement and a man ran out with this AK-47 and fired at Tony and me. Dmitri smiled. I stopped a bullet. Dmitri looked at Tony. He sent 2 bullets back to the shooter. Tony held up 3 fingers. I stand corrected, sir. 3 bullets back to the shooter. Willa put a green lanyard around Dmitri's neck. Yellow lanyard means you can stop 10 tennis balls. Green lanyard signifies you can stop a bullet. Dmitri was all smiling. Tony, there must be others in the building involved. President Putin shared, what do you suggest? We take everybody in the building to see God and let God sort it out, Tony shared. President Putin nodded. The 4 of them came together holding hands, and in an instant, they were standing on the catwalk on the west side of the sun. About 1,000 men and women were there. They had all come from the Kremlin. In a few places, the railing opened, and individuals were being pulled toward the sun. President Putin watched and counted as about 100 exploded and disappeared. The 20 that were in the training made their way to President Putin. Sir, we are here to help protect you. Dmitri approached the soldiers in training. He held out his green lanyard. When you can stop 10 tennis balls, you get a yellow lanyard and the right to be tested. When you can stop a bullet, you will get a green lanyard like this. Dmitri then pointed to the sun. This is hell. Now we are going to see God. Holster your weapons. Tony looked to President Posen and smiled. The president smiled back and nodded. The three added Dmitri to their little circle. In the next instant, they were before God. Vid Posen had always felt he was being guided in his decision-making. There, before him, was a man who looked like Saint Nicholas the Martyr. Standing next to the Tsar was his family. Tony was on his right and Dmitri was on his left. Tony glanced behind him when he heard a gasp. Maya was holding Scud, and standing next to her was another woman and a group of young people Tony didn't recognize. Tony would learn later Vid Posen had wished to have both of his families here. Tony did not see Vid's father and mother standing behind his mates and children, but they were there. Vid walked up to the Tsar. "Kneel, Vid Posen, leader of the Russian people." The man ordered, "For I am Tsar Nicholas II, Emperor of all Russia. I hold the spirit of Mother Russia. We have been waiting for you to arrive. I pass the spirit on to you, dear soul, to care for and love my people. Sons of Posen, come and kneel." Mesha, who was in his early 20s, moved away from his mother and sisters and held out his hands to Scud. Scud had been wanting to get down. He jumped into the arms of his half-brother. The two of them moved to stand next to their father's kneeling form. When Mesha put Scott down, the little boy went over and hugged the Tsar's leg. He then turned and took his father's hand and stood beside him. "Men of Posen, take this time to learn all you can of God. You will be responsible for our mother Russia until graduation. If you need me, I will be here." The Tsar and his family slowly disappeared. "Dad, where are we?" Mesha asked. "This is God," Vid advised his son. "I didn't think you believed in God," Mesha stated while picking up Scoot again. "I didn't believe, but now I know," Vid advised his oldest son. "How's your English? Top of the class, why?" Mesha asked. "I have another class for you to take as soon as you can work it in. I will be in it with you." Vid looked around and waved Tony over to join them. When Tony came near, "Tony, I would like for you to meet my son, Mesha." Vid watched as the two young men shook hands. Tony is called Big Fisherman by the native people of his country. His father is the President of the new United States. Twice now, I have heard that my sons will become presidents of Russia. Tony followed Vid's introduction with, "And when the fish are running again, I will invite both of you to my home in Washington to fish with me and my father along the banks of the Okanagan River. Maybe we can come together again for one of those times in about a year." Tony smiled. "Fishing season just ended back home, but we understand next year's fish run will be twice what we had this year." The class they'd advertised began on Tuesday morning. The 400 students were made up of soldiers and members of an engineering battalion. Tony and Willa had 40 helpers made up of those from the States and some from Russia. That way they could communicate with everyone there. Everyone seemed very excited, and those who didn't have any English made up for their lack of understanding with enthusiasm. When President Putin showed up to take part in the class, everyone realized how important this was. Tony broke the class up into units of 20. Each had a leader who could speak English and an assistant that was full of enthusiasm. When President Putin arrived, he went over and shook hands with Tony and Willa. Tony then took the whole group to God and had them start asking questions. When his group had made their introductions to God, President Putin came up to Tony. "We are ready to go back. How many can you transport?" Tony asked. 20? 10 maybe, President Putin offered. "Tell your assistant we will let him go first if he's comfortable," Tony shared. The assistant disappeared with half of the 20-man team. President Putin tried twice and nothing happened. Tony turned to the team and spoke a few simple words in Russian. "Going home, deep breath." He turned to the president. President Putin took a deep breath and they were gone. That night after dinner, as they had done the night before, Maya and Vid worked with Tony and Willa dozens of times transporting back and forth. On Wednesday, Vid Putin approached Tony. "Things have changed." He pointed to his head. "On Monday, I was hoping I could do these things. Now I know that I can." "Good. On Friday, we will have you take the engineers to the goldfields." Tony tried not to laugh as he saw concern cross President Putin's face. "How many can you transport?" President Putin asked. "On Monday, the group of 445 is my new record by myself." Tony smiled. Transporting 1,000 with the help of others is also a personal best for me. How many can your father transport? Poussin asked. This fall, he and a few friends took almost 40,000 to God. Tony shared, but I have heard the first time Dad took 600 to God, he felt overwhelmed. That was not that long ago, just last summer. On Friday, Mr. President, I will put a black lanyard around your neck and we will find your gold. We will be done here. Tony took Willa's hand and they smiled at their friend. List complete? Vid asked. Getting close. Willa shared, hopefully by Friday. President Poussin looked around at his men and women. There were just a handful of yellow lanyards. Most had blue or green, and he even spotted a few red lanyards. Another week of training and his people would be ready to take on the training of a division. In a few weeks, he envisioned that his people could transport the needed food all over the country and making the necessary repairs to the roads and rail lines. Tell your dad I want to exchange some gold coins for some silver coins. How many, sir? Tony asked. 25 millions of your 1-ounce silver coins for 1 million of our 1-ounce gold coins, Vid suggested. We agree. Tony held out his hand to shake on the deal. President Poussin grasped the offered hand. How does a young man like yourself have that much power? My job title someday will be Treasurers of the World, Tony laughed. It's what I am working on. I'm currently Dad's assistant treasurer of the new United States.